Hello and welcome to this new layout update video. In this video we're going to be developing this bridge section of the layout where the canal is. As you can see, I'm going to build a embankment there down to the canal and detail all this up, and also put some scenery and embankment around the supports for the track bed. Also going to develop the station on the preserved line. At the moment it's being used as a bit of a shelf, so I'm going to give it a good clean up, and then we're going to add some polystyrene for the base of the scenery. Having cleaned it up, I've now put some polystyrene down and give it a coat of masking tape. I've also removed that track there to ease of construction. I will be putting that back in. I've used masking tape over this as I'm using a different method for this part, just as an experiment. I've seen on the Hornby Magazine's YouTube channel that they use masking tape and paper with PVA glue, so I'm going to be doing that here and see how I get on with that. Once all the painting and scenery is down, I plan to have something unusual in this little bit of a corner of a layout, something I've not seen before, but we'll come to that later on. I've also added the polystyrene on this part here and the embankment, and I've also put some in between the track and up to the back scene there. This will all get painted once the plaster bandage or paper has been put down and dried, and I'm going to try and blend it in with the scenery I did in the last video up in the top corner there. This is a few days later. I've put the paper down, shredded it with PVA glue and reinstated the track. It went on okay, but I'm not overly impressed with it. I'm going to go back to using my usual method of plaster bandage. I find it a lot more easier to work with. The paper took some time to get soaking wet to manipulate it around forms like this bridge, for example, whereas the plaster bandage is a lot easier to make go around shapes, etc. So I'm going to use plaster bandage on the rest of it, but it was worth trying it, but it just wasn't for me this time. I'm going to try and make this embankment not quite as steep before I do that, and also I've got to paint this base now, so I'm going to crack on with the plaster bandage work, and then that takes 2 or 3 days to dry, as when I was filming this was back in November, so it took a little while to dry. It's just a quick time lapse of what I do. Just cut it into probably 12-inch strips and then just put it on, and then wet it with the wet paintbrush and leave to thoroughly dry. Like I said, I find this method works a lot better than the paper and PVA glue method, and it's easier to put the plaster bandage around awkward shapes such as the embankment and the bridge abutments. Well, that's that done, and it's all drying nicely now. The only downside is from using plaster bandages, there's a lot more mess, a lot more dust, whereas the paper and PVA glue method left no dust and very little mess. I've reinstated that track now and soldered it back on, and I've ballasted it, and I'm now going to start painting all the other white bits with the darker brown. This is some time later when the paint's dry and I've added the first layer of static grass on everything. I'm going to have to tidy up the footpaths under there, as like I said, that's all dust from the plaster bandage, but it's now starting to look nice. Another quick jump now, and this is several weeks later. I've done another layer of static grass and added some daffodils, some fence, some old telegraph poles there, and it's starting to look really nice. I've also painted the base of the canal there, and I will pour some realistic water later on. It'll only need a thin coat as it's not quite a deep canal bank. I said I was going to do something unusual on this side, and what I've done is I've actually making an archaeological dig. These are ceramic pieces of tile or plate that my son found whilst walking the dog in the local fields. So I've glued them in, and in this square hole here, a friend of mine, John, who actually works at Trains for You in Peterborough, has 3D printed me some 1/76 scale skeletons. So I'm going to be putting these in the hole, and it's going to look like they've been dug up by the archaeologists. That digger in the background there is just a matchbox model, or it may even be a Saiku one that I found that is roughly the right scale. Also in this update, I'm going to develop the yard a bit. Where the 2 tracks are was a Loco shed, but I actually want more storage sidings, so I'm going to move this about a bit and remove those 2 tracks and lay 4 dead-end sidings there, just to give myself some more storage and more shunting opportunities, as that is something I quite enjoy doing. The derelict peak here that I've made out of a magazine model is staying put where it is, as this will become the Loco head shunt. So here I am removing all the track work from the old Loco shed. Luckily it wasn't too tightly glued down with the ballast, and removing the track pins allowed me to scrape the track up with a scraper, and it all came up and was able to be reused later on. This layout update has been some time in the making, as I've had other projects on the go, as you've probably seen, trash to track and various other things. But I hope now the weather's warmer I can get out here a bit more and do a bit more this year, especially developing this yard and the Loco area. Here you can see the sidings I've been mocking up to see how many I can fit in and how can it look realistic. And I'm actually going to put the Loco shed there, and it's going to be accessed via a head shunt. And that white piece of card there is just sort of glued down just to cover the holes where the old inspection pits were. So I'm going to fiddle around with this a little bit more, and going to try and get all this glued down and ballasted, and then we'll give it a test. But I'm happy with this so far. I'm not sure why I didn't do this when I actually built the layout, but having the Loco shed and fueling point there behind this signal box is going to be a lot better, I think. It will look a lot less cramped and than it did before. The Backman Scenecraft Loco shed there, it really is a good piece of kit, but it is quite expensive now. I bought that when it was first released, and I think it was about £35. Doing this will give this yard quite a lot of siding space. Now the track's down in its final layout, you can see I've added the pits there in the shed, and it's all waiting to be wired up at this point, so these Locos are just there for display purposes. But there's 4 roads come down into one, and this goes on to the locomotive head shunt, so all the Locos have to go up the head shunt towards the derelict peak before setting back into the Loco for fuel or stabling. And the 4 extra sidings have given me a lot more extra room now to store stock that isn't being used on the layout. And the road where the parcel train is, I might actually use that as a carriage siding for some units, etc. But we'll have a look at that later on. Right, it's now starting to ballast it all. I used your normal Gauge Master N gauge ballast for this. It's all been ballasted, all looks quite good, just a little bit of tidying up to do. Then I'll glue it all down and then attach all the feeder wires underneath the layout to the bus wire and give it a thorough test. And there's the that's the ballast I use. That's the ballast I've used on all the layout. I think it looks quite realistic for 00, even though it's marketed for N gauge. Colour coded wires underneath, orange for the right hand rail, yellow for the left, onto the bus wires which are black, and red also colour coded. And again, several weeks later, once the ballast is all dried and the track's cleaned, I'm just testing it with this Helgen 33 to make sure everything runs nicely and it all appears in good order. I also use the Hatton's P-Class Loco to test all the sidings and points. As I've said before in videos, it's always recommended to use a Loco with a short wheelbase, so then any dead spots are easier to find. A long Loco like a 33 or a Class 40 will bridge dead spots, and then when you're shunting with an 08 you'll find them at the most inconvenient time. See that 33 hesitated there slightly on that point, so I will have to take some time to rectify and clean that. All my points are hand turned and I haven't got any frog juices or anything, as the wiring really does put me off, as so does the cost. Frog juicing all the points I've got on this layout would just be cost prohibitive and it would take too long, and it's money I can spend on other things, to be quite honest. So yeah, going back to the Hatton's P-Class, it was there shunting steel wagons, not exactly realistic, but that's tested all this new yard layout and everything is working fine, apart from the odd dead spot on the points as we just saw with the 33. So that's the yard developed, and it's more of a scenic fiddle yard now, so that I can store trains on, as there's not a fiddle yard with the layout. But I prefer that, as I do like shunting around, as I said earlier. Developed this area even more, added some more daffodil tufts and bushes, location cabinets, point motors, and I've weathered the track here, which I intend to do all across the layout. I've even put some limited clearance signs on the bridge post there, and a 15-mile-an-hour sign on the freight only branch. Going down towards the canal, I've put some tall trees there in the corner, which actually mirror a field not far from my house. And the canal has had a realistic water poured, and as you can see, I've added a lot of detail like the swans, the life ring, There's a chap there with a fishing rod, a preserved coal barge, and then we've got a family fishing off their own narrowboat into the canal. I do have some bits to touch up under the bridge that I've missed, but I'll do these when I get the paints out again another time. But it's really starting to look the part, and I'm really happy with this. This section of the layout now, I've added a hut and yet more scatter and bushes, and I've also developed the preserved line, which we'll come to in a moment. The archaeological dig area is now finished. I've added some people. There's a chap there looking at that Roman floor with his wheelbarrow and his Land Rover. As I said before, those ceramic parts were found in the local field whilst we were walking the dog, and they look a bit like a mosaic floor, which I'm happy with. And these skeletons that are in this hole and slightly covered in brown scatter really do look good. They look better in real life than on this video, and on this video they look good. So I'm really happy with how this has turned out. And it's something I've never seen on a model railway before, ever. So it is quite unique. And with my son being interested in history so much, it was something he wanted to incorporate, and I'm glad I've managed to do it and do it justice. Please let me know in the comments what you think below. I've developed the station now. This preserved line station we've decided to call Dowsby, which is a local village to where I am. I've added this Hornby signal gantry just for play value and to control exit into the yard. I've detailed up the stations with scale scene signs, and I've got the fencing from ratio and the figures, and I've basically made it so now it's like an interchange station for the preserved line and the main railway. I am really happy with how this has turned out, and as you can see, the Network South East red is creeping in on the bins, on the benches, and these signs are also scale scenes that I've stuck onto this Metcalfe building here. This is a scale scenes station that I've had for a while, and a dapole footbridge. The part of the fence is red as well, just so the Network South East Red Army are there painting it. Once I get some suitable painting figures, I'll be adding those. I've also detailed up the preserved line Loco shed, and if I just move this unit out of the way, we'll have a look inside, and I've added a floor and a lot of detail in here as the roofs are removable. There's ladders, there's barrels, there's a set of driving wheels off a bullied at the back there. There's cabs, bins, basically anything you could think of I've tried to add in there, and there'll be a lot more detail to go in. I'm really happy with how this has turned out. This is a Gauge Master engine shed kit. There's two of them there coupled together, and I've added a working gate to control the main line connection from the preserved line just there. All the signs you see scattered around are scale scenes that I've printed off and kept, and there's various of these van bodies around. Everything's fixed in place with a small amount of PVA glue to aid in cleaning the layout and dusting it. And then there's some more grass tufts there. I must get round to painting that chimney pot at some point, as I keep forgetting. And then there's a couple of Hornby signals to control exit. But Dowsby station is all but done. I think it looks really good. Again, any comments are welcome. And this here on the preserved line, this Thomas ride, this was actually out of a busy book that my children had when they were little. Just about the right scale. It looks like a children's ride on the platform for the preserved steam railway. So yeah, it's not looking too bad at all really. It's starting to look really nice. Now we've done this part of the layout, I'm going to show you some developments I've done around the other side near the seawall and in the village in the opposite corner of the layout. Moving on to the seawall section, this is the next part I'm going to develop, where the seaside shop is and that. The cobblestones need laying and just finishing off the seafront area. I've obtained a ice cream van. I've got a bit of scenic repair to do near the lighthouse. That, the glue's obviously not adhered properly and is cracked. But the only other thing I've done is add a few people to the beach. This is an ongoing thing, it'll be a long time to get the beach how I want it. And I've also started to add the culvert water, just leaving realistic water to flow naturally. And I'll follow that up with some coats of varnish. And yeah, a few more people on the bridge, etc. on the seawall section. And that brings us to the village in this corner of the layout. I've Done a lot more detailing in this part of the village. Put the static grass in the field, made a sheep pen out of an old van body, added a lot more sheep and a lot more details, such as the road sign. And there's Raymond on his bicycle. There's a motorcyclist, postman talking to Mrs. Mop. And then you come around and I've detailed at the pub that we've called the Railway. There's a bike outside and various kegs. Some signals on the wall. The coach is now fastened in place. And where the road originally was, I've got rid of that and I've made a beer garden with these Metcalf tables, benches and this play area. So I think that looks really good. And the Railway pub signs came from an old freebie from Model Rail many years ago. Now, we couldn't think of a name for this village. And down here is the stream, which I've also done some work on. So thinking about it and using family names, this village is now the village of Broughton Slack. The village of Broughton Slack with its associated station and junction, which goes off into the fiddle yard there. Theory behind it is that this was the village of Broughton, and the river down here, well, this is what the locals call the Slack. So it's Broughton Slack, named after the river. I've added a few more cows. I'm going to do some more static grass on this area to make it look a bit better. But also made some fishermen. So here we have Dave. Dave is a very good fisherman. As you can see, he's got a fish on there, bending his rod in the stream. He's had quite a few. And then further on towards the viaduct, that's Jack. Known to his friends as Moses, as he spends most of his time in the bulrushes. Although he has caught quite a lot on this session. Jack's caught the far bank, a cow, the viaduct and the 12:15 to Plymouth. Whereas Dave here has got a net full of roach and bream. And then walking along in the background there, we've met this character before. In the first Trash to Track, this is driver Paul with his dog Basil, walking through the fields on this nice summer's day. One thing I do like about this part is I can view this part of the layout from both sides, so you can see quite a lot of the detail which otherwise you'd miss. majority of the garden railway survived the winter very well. Bird muck is a problem because it's been out of use for some time, and the lift out section that I made, I damaged that when I took this out when I had an oil delivery. So I'm going to rethink the design of this. I'm going to revisit that. Also, one thing is the pigeons have broken a couple of telegraph poles, and the crossing, all that seems to be down here in the grass. This was Storm Eunice, I think. Might have to think about fixing that in somehow. There's a couple of other bits missing. All the bits located, although one barrier I need replacing. I do have spares going along. It needs a good brush up with a broken telegraph pole. Completely missing telegraph pole, which will be on the grass somewhere. The track itself has survived in good nick. I mean, this will all brush off. This is dry. This will brush, and we go round another telegraph pole and another one. The points have survived. I oiled these up every couple of weeks. Signal box roof, and these gates have survived all intact. So that's good news. Now, somebody did ask about the durability of these outside. As you can see, the roof there is slightly faded, but the rest of it, all this has been out here all winter, and yeah, it's looking pretty good. The roofs are faded, but they're 30-year-old models, they are, as is these platform bits. This has been lost 2 or 3 times due to wind, but was relocated in that bush. Before we get the garden up and going again, I'm going to move this crossover to here, because last year there was some slight expansion between the 2 bits, and it actually pushed and ruined a point. So I'm going to move the crossover to here, so it's on one piece of wood like that one up there. So yeah, it survived the winter relatively well, and I hope to get trains running in the next few days, and then there'll be a separate garden session for uploads, and then planning permission with the relevant indoor authorities is underway for the extension. I actually did send it through the post as a written letter, so I'm waiting a response, and fingers crossed. I've just done some work on this last few days. I've replaced this entire plank because the other one had bowed really badly, like it was banana shaped. This new one is properly supported now. I'd missed the support out, which is what allowed it to bow, but this one's now perfectly level. I'm going to put these support brackets in and relay the track. And the weather's a lot warmer now than it was when I filmed out here before, and you can see the extent of how much that has expanded if you compare it from what it looked like a few minutes ago in the video. So this has all been cut and angled, ready for the curve, as I'm still working on planning permission, but it's easier to apply for it once it's built, I think.
shouldn't be there.